This recording is about configuration management systems and what we're going to use from them. The screen shows that configuration management systems can get wildly complicated. We are going to use a much simpler mental model, and we're going to use Git and GitHub. What we want from GitHub is an ability to save a copy of our project and keep saving it as it changes, and if it goes horribly wrong, be able to step back to a good place in that project where it wasn't so damaged. So let's stop looking at this diagram and think in a much more simple terms about how we're going to use GitHub. As we go through this process, I'll try and do a sort of drawing as a mental visualization of what's going on. This is of course a wild simplification. There isn't a GitHub cloud as such, it's nothing magical. There is a GitHub data center off in whatever warehouse they could buy cheap enough to host a great deal of data servers. But imagine it as a GitHub cloud. And because they're nice people, they are going to give for free a little area of that cloud over to me, which is all good news. That's going to be my portion of the GitHub central cloud. I've navigated to github.com, which is the web page for the organization which is going to manage our centralized repository. And let's just take a quick look at pricing here and plans and the wonders of the economy that we live in at the moment, possibly on the way to a post-scarcity society, is that there's lots of really good free stuff. And GitHub are so nice, they give us, what's that, half a gigabyte of storage, and we can have as many public or private repositories as we like, and they don't really want any money off us until we are rich and famous, when we're wanting to do really sort of enterprisey type stuff, or at least are beginning to build up a organization of our own. So right now, we don't need all of these wonderful things that they offer. We just need the basic, please store my central copy of my projects. So let's just go back and we will go into the adventure of trying to sign up. So let's go sign up for GitHub here. I think we've got a couple of routes to get to this. It starts in a cute let's begin with the adventure. I will give it one of my older email addresses. Organization which doesn't exist anymore, but the email address still does. And because of that, let's give it a new password. Quite likes my password, great. Let's continue. Username. It recommends that I've had usernames in the past. Did you know that my first name was Charles? Let's try setting it. This is what your repository will be called into the future. So beware that you give it something fairly sensible. I'll just do my initial and then my name, C. Mark Jeffcock. We've got an email, we've got a password, we've got a username. Continue. Would you like to receive products and announcements via the email? Oh, I don't think so. Too many of those in my life. Okay, we're still trying to begin the adventure, and I gotta solve a puzzle. Good grief. Please solve this puzzle to verify that you are human. Human who are good on puzzles and know what a spiral galaxy is. But if you don't know what a spiral galaxy is, things that look like spirals. Hey, I'm a human! Great, let's create an account. Almost done, we've had to launch code. Okay, so I go back to my email account where they have sent me a code. Type in the rather long code that they sent. And I'm in. How many team members will be working with you? Right at the moment, we're just talking about me. I mean, in the future, we may move up to project teams, but I don't think we're going to hold us to this, so let's just say it's me. Are you a student or a teacher? I'm trying to set up a student type account, so I'm just going to say I'm a student. On we go. Oh, good heavens, lots of questions. What specific features are you interested in using? We are most, let's say, collaborative coding because we're likely to use that in the future. But the whole automation and security and client apps, project management, this is all way over the top stuff which we do not need at the moment. Let's just do collaborative coding, I think. Ship software like a pro. This appears to be a bit of an advert for why don't you upgrade and actually give us some money. So maybe we're not quite so generous as I thought. But right now we're quite happy being freeloaders. So let's just continue for free. Whoa! And a wonderful animation happens to us. Initializing your dashboard. Version control systems can be somewhat confusing, so I will occasionally mention where we are at any point. So it's good to remember that we are currently still somewhere in the cloud in the GitHub area, and we are going to create a repository for one project, and that's a centralized part of what will be a distributed version control system. First off, though, let's just take a little look here. There is actually a nice piece of documentation on, well, what the heck does a version control system do? And here on quick start, all of this, certainly this page that we've got here on creating a repository, creating a branch, making and committing changes, pull requests, merging and the like, is good stuff to give you some background information why we're doing this. So you don't want to watch me read it. Please have a look at this for yourself. It may well help you out. Now, in my area in the GitHub cloud, I'm going to create a repository that will be where my project is stored. So I'm going to create my own repo inside my area, and I'm going to call it Green Sphere. On the cloud, I am creating a centralized area, a repository where it's going to hold master copies of the important file for our Unity project. Let's create that repository. And it says, ho, you are the owner, so I will call it under my owner name, C. Mark Jeffcock. What sort of repository do you want? Well, not what sort, what do you want to call your repository? And I will call my repository Green Sphere because I'm going to create a project in Unity called Green Sphere because I do wild and wacky worlds, obviously. Let's just try quick description of it, a green sphere. What did you think it was going to be? Public or private? Vast majority of people use GitHub for public projects. We're going to use it for public projects. We're not doing anything so confidential that it needs to be made private, and besides which, if you tried private, it would probably start trying to charge you. Oh, I thought it would start trying to take my credit card details for that point. Never mind, back to public. And it asks us a few interesting questions about the repository that we haven't yet created, that place where we're going to hold our files. It says, do you want a README file? And that's usually useful, if not, certainly not essential, but it's worth doing. Do you want to add a .gitignore? Now, a gitignore file is really useful. Inside your Unity projects, there are a lot of files which, strangely enough, are not essential. They are indexing type files to help Unity find out where everything is, or they are temporary files which is just hanging on to for a moment, and you don't really want to push those up into your cloud and use up your precious half a gigabyte worth of space. So the gitignore file allows us to define what we don't want to push to this centralized repository. So I'm going to say yes, we do want a gitignore file, and it has some suggestions as to what we might put in that file. Depending on what language we were using. And as we're using Unity, it has a suggestion of things you might want to ignore from Unity. So I'm going to select that as that suggestions. We can modify it later, but that's a good start. And a license telling what they can and can't do with your code. It's unlikely that anybody's going to want to take a look at my green sphere. I'm just not going to bother with a license at the moment. Let's create that repository. And here is my first repository in my C-Mark Jeffcock space. It's got a simple name of green sphere. It's got two files in it, a readme.md and a .gitignore file, and we are on the main branch. We'll talk about branches a little bit later. So the main branch, as I said, just contains these two files. Readme.md just contains that little bit of text I put in, say green sphere is all about green spheres. And if we clicked on gitignore, we could see what that says. Here's details of the gitignore file at the moment, and it's saying, if we have subdirectories of these names, libraries and objects and builds and log files and memory captures, we don't want any of this stuff to come up to a centralized repository. And then there's more details about file extensions that we can ignore as well. Like things like called .temp are of no use to us. You don't want your builds, you don't want a .apk built. So that's kept for minimizing everything that will come up to this repository at the moment. Let's just go back. I should maybe point out that the underlying software we're using is called Git, and that there are several hosting services which use Git to transfer from a cloud down to your local system. But we have chosen GitHub as a relatively easy one to use, and it has a nice client which we now need to install on our local PC or Mac, ready to receive and transfer information from the cloud. So our next step is to install GitHub Desktop, which is a client on your local system to communicate with GitHub Cloud. So I've just hunted for GitHub Desktop. Get a few answers up here, and we want to look at this website here, desktop.github.com. And it offers you the ability to download for Windows in a big box, and it hints that there is a download for Mac down here. Let me download my Windows version, and I want to open it. Let it just install. Oh, and there we are. Oh, not displaying the right window. Here we are. Oh. I had the remains of an old GitHub access on my system, so I have to go to File, Options, and sign into my github.com account. It may prompt you for this automatically. Here we are. I'm going to sign in with a browser, and I want to access via my Jeffcock account, so let's authorize the desktop, and I need to put in my password. Then we need to link the GitHub Desktop to the GitHub Cloud by what's called cloning the repository that we've got up in GitHub Cloud. And we are going to clone the information from the GitHub Cloud down to our local PC. It seems to have recognized that I'm a new user here, and it's going to be in friendly mode, and it even knows what my repository is. Now there are options here for when I was just going to start something fresh, creating a new repository on my hard drive, or maybe it's forgotten about one of my repositories or you could add to one. But we've started by creating our repository in the cloud, so what we want to do is to clone it from the internet down to our local system. And I've got a couple of options here. I can either, because it's remembered who I am, just pick my Greensphere repository and it would clone it to a local path here. Alternatively, it's quite often useful, particularly if you're looking at somebody else's work, to do it via a URL. Ignore this one in the middle here, GitHub Enterprise not for us. If we went for the URL, then I could just look up my repository on the internet, copy that, go back here and put it in as a URL. Same effect as I would have with the github.com repository here. As I said, I'm just going to do it with the URL. Local path, it's giving me a place that it thinks all its GitHub stuff should be. I'm not going to take that because I like to keep all of my Unity projects together. So I'm just going to choose the place where I keep my Unity projects. Drag myself down to that. Here are my previous Unity projects. And let's clone. Here I'm in GitHub Desktop. It tells me my current repository is my Greensphere one. Doesn't seem to be much going on at the moment. Oh, I can look at the files in my repository on my local system. Let's show in Explorer. and you can see I've got it in my Unity area. I've got a folder called Green Sphere, and it's just got a Git folder, a Git ignore file and a README file that we had in the cloud and have now been cloned and copied down to this local area. The local repository here only includes those couple of files that we made up here in the GitHub Green Sphere version. All of this was so that we could finally create ourselves a project in Unity, which again is going to be my Green Sphere project. And here I've just separated out that Unity will have a lot of files, and we're just going to constantly save a portion of them and not take up some of the temporary and library type files that we don't need. Let's just create myself a new project, correct myself to the right version, 3D, I'm going to call it Green Sphere. Here I am allowed not to have a dash here. I can have a space in a Unity project name. And let's take a look at where we're going to put it. So this is where my Unity courses are, but I've already created a directory Green Sphere, so I'm going to select that as my location. We'll see the effect of that in a moment. Create the project. Here's my directory of Unity projects. If we look in the old red cube one, it goes one level down, is straight into the sort of directories you have in your Unity project. Go back. But now my Green Sphere one goes down to a sort of a Git layer of information, and only as a subdirectory of itself, the Green Sphere Unity project, do you get to the Unity portion. So that is good for clarity, but is about to give us another different problem. Let's just open up my GitHub Desktop, and here inside GitHub Desktop it knows what it's talking about, the Green Sphere repository, or we could change that if we had another repository to change to, and it thinks there are an enormous number of changed files, and that's all of the possible Unity files which are now underneath it. 7,165 files is an awful lot to be pushing around, and by the look of them, horrible names there, a lot of them are temporary files, not something that we want to keep storing up to the cloud. So this is a fault in the Unity git ignore file, which we can modify. Back at the Green Sphere Git layer, remember that folder there has all the Unity files inside it. This is just a sort of a Git layer file. We can edit the .gitignore file. Choose more apps. I just need to do it with Notepad because it's a nice and simple text file. And our problem is with these file structure names here. You just remove the slash at the start of these. This will now correctly identify those subdirectories. Let's just save that. File save. Come out of it. Go back into GitHub. And here in GitHub, you can see that the number of things which it really needs to save is a great deal smaller. It's a mere 27 files, and I think that's a reasonable number to be working with. I'm going to stop the video here because we have done all the necessary setup of our GitHub cloud, our local GitHub client on the desktop, and we now have our Unity project, and I will do a second video doing all the GitHub commands you can do to start moving these files to relevant places.